Hello, stargazers. Welcome back to the Outlaw Astrology podcast. I am your host, APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective. And today we're wrapping up our 3-part deep dive into the dyatlov pass instant. Quick housekeeping, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Pinterest and YouTube for our daily cosmic insights. Subscribe to the daily Stargazing newsletter for exclusive cosmic content and updates. And also, we have a tip jar. Please, if you want to make a one-time donation, you can support us at Buy Me a Coffee. You can find that link in the show notes. And if you like our Astro Flow, please subscribe where we have subscriptions. Please share. And please leave a review, give us 5 stars so that other people can find us with great ease. Thank you very much. And one last thing, trigger warning, today's episode discusses theories about death and unexplained phenomena, so those of you who are a bit sensitive and like a little bit more of a low risk, you might want to sit this one out. And with that said, onward. Now, what we talked about last time was the setup, and here it is. 10 hikers ascended the Ural Mountains in Siberia in January 1959. At that time, it would have been winter in the Northern Hemisphere. That particular region was known because it is Siberia and very far to the north and can get quite chilly and quite cold, which was the standard conditions at that time for that time of year, late January 1959, moving into early February of 1959. The hikers were organized by a fellow by the name of Dyatlov, who was a 23-year-old student, like most of them were, at a nearby university, as all of them were science and engineering students, with the exception of one who was vastly different in age and had been included with the group towards its ending. They filed all the necessary papers. They told their parents, they told the school, the community and the school were in support of these 10 people, which included 8 males and 2 women. They were level 2 alpinists, meaning mountain climbers, hikers, and they were going for their level 3 certification, which was all that there were in the USSR at the time, because this was during the Cold War. And that is all the highest you could go. And they were very experienced. So it was not a group of impulsive people deciding that they're just going to take on this mountain and devil-may-care attitude and hell be damned and etc. They were very well versed, experienced. They knew exactly what papers to file and when and who to apply to. They were very organized. It was very, very well put together, has a very high Virgo Taurus stamp of both approval and also Capricorn, so very earthy in its staying on top of things, every detail. However, as we all know, the best well-laid plans can go awry. And the Dyatlov Pass instant is no exception. Something went awry, or pear-shaped, or sideways, or just plain bloody wrong. And so that is the setup so far. And so, at that point, I gave a timeline, which if you want to hear that, you can listen to episodes 1 and 2 to do so that I don't have to do that again here, because I want to keep this on schedule and moving forward, and also not too long. So that's where we left it. We left it at the timeline, which ends. So the timeline starts late, about the 25th, thereabouts, of January, and goes all the way to about the 1st or the 2nd of February 1959. And the reason I say 1st or 2nd is because it's not exactly known when exactly what the events were, when what happened. When the final event occurred, it occurred about once on February 1st or 2nd. Now, we're all curious as humans, and cases like this have a lot of theories. And even the people, the community, the parents, everybody has a theory. And the government had a theory. I mean, everybody has put their stamp on this since 1959. And it's still one of those stories that just brings out the curious, brings out the mystery, brings out the questioner, the conspiracy theorist, and makes us go, because all the details just don't seem to add up perfectly. Example, they were found in more than one place, at least 3 or 4 different places. They were found in states of undress that would not have been ideal for that weather. It was cold, it was windy, and it was snowing. Conditions would have been very poor on a mountain compared to the ground. So it was not warm weather. It was freezing, actually. If it's snowing, it's freezing. So 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees thereabouts Fahrenheit. If it was daylight, they wouldn't have seen because it might have been a whiteout. If it was dark, then it would have been pitch black. So to give you the idea of the conditions. So those were the conditions. And they weren't all found. Their bodies were found in very different states, rates of decay, in very different states of, whether they were whole or not whole, different states of undress. Some were completely dressed for the weather, and others dressed as if they were going to go for a walk on the beach. Some were missing socks and clothing items. One would have a sock or a shoe, but would be missing, and the other sock or shoe. And also, as I've said, injuries. It didn't sound like, okay, this person has these injuries, but these people don't have that injury, so what the hell happened? So some pretty severe injuries. All of that is not neatly explained by one theory, which is what we're going to step into next, which is right now. So what we have is a Bigfoot theory, and here's why. What the 38-year-old male, and I'm going very vague here out of respect to the families and to the victims of this mystery, okay? So you can always, if you want to know more detail, because it's an astrology podcast, not a true crime podcast, you are free to do your own research via the internet, okay? Because it's a really well-known case. But one of the travelers, 38-year-old male, had his camera roll, and one of the last images was of a very tall, ungainly, fuzzy figure in front of him a few feet, and you can't see distinct features. So they thought, well, that's very strange to have on your camera roll. Could it be Bigfoot? And this is where Neptune comes in. Now, why do we say that? Because Neptune's also about confusion. It is about illusion. Yet I said confusion and illusion and also delusion. And which is really an interesting thing for a case with so much mystery that nobody can help but have a theory. So what we're going to do is present you with all of those theories. So that's the first theory. And that gives us our Neptunian bent on this one. So let's check out where Neptune was hanging out. Now, I've cast the chart for February 1st, 1959, and I went with midnight, although I will adjust that to say about 4:30. So right now I'm going to adjust the time to account for a change. So let's say about 4:30 from midnight. So we'll see how much of adjustment from last week, because I used midnight for last week. So this is like my best guess based on my research. And Neptune was hanging out in Scorpio, in the second house in this particular chart, which has the ascendant and the north node in Libra. So diplomatic. Okay, and that might come in handy later. So 6 degrees of Scorpio, Neptune. So secrets, things that are hidden, might attract authority figures, meaning powerful people. And since Pluto would be calling the shots on this Neptune, we're going to go find Pluto. And Pluto, where are you? Okay, Pluto is hiding out, oddly enough, in the 12th house, which is the house of hidden things. Okay? And for the sake of spiritual astrology and quantum astrology, which is the astrology of that which is mysterious, unexplained, it's a way of trying to understand events that are beyond comprehension. And the 12th house in this particular method is all about that which is hidden, and it is in Virgo, and it is at 3 degrees. So that would be a sextile, because water and earth, which is very kind of a receptive yin type energy, that is a 3 degree orb. And so when we're looking at this, sextiles are opportunities. They have to. So is it likely that things were very confusing? Is information hidden? Yes. It was about 3 days after, and there was snow. So snow and cold preserves things much better, but the crime scene was all over the place. Everybody was in different places, up to at least a few kilometers away from one another. So that's a big expanse, and the scene was not untouched. Apparently the elements were involved, and also it is theorized that animal predation happened, and that the hikers did not all expire at the same time. So those would be some of the ways I would look at that Pluto and its rulership, its short calling of Neptune, and that would be a sextile. And it's doing it from the 12th to the 2nd. The second can be also about what resources do we have available here. It's kind of confusing. It's if you don't know enough about the case and none of the facts seem to add up, you are forced to then theorize very wildly and very variably, and that wider field doesn't actually provide enough raw data for concrete answers. And where Neptune's involved, concrete answers are not likely to be. So Neptune in this chart is also 5 degrees conjunct the moon. And the moon is about comfort. It's about safety. But here it's about what things are underneath the surface unconsciously. And unconsciously, things are being hidden, and not necessarily intentionally, because it's unconscious. The moon is also about the unconscious. So in this is what unconscious factors could be contributing to the mystery. How to pose that question, we don't really know, because resources here is a very highly investigative, inquisitive energy, which is Scorpio energy, the whys, the wherefores. Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's go see what the answers are, no matter how frightening, how dark, how taboo. That's Scorpio energy, and very dogged. That's the fixity of the thing. So that is 5 degrees off. What we have is even opposing that Neptune is the repressed in the house of the 8th house, which is conditions of death. And we've got Black Moon Lilith in opposition at 4 degrees, and it's Taurus. And Taurus is, I'm going to take my time about this. And also the question is digging this far worth it? Is it worth these answers? Do we care? Is this information going to be valuable? At some point, people must have wondered, and shouldn't we just let it go? Or, more to the point, Taurus energy is slow and intrepid with intention. And the intention is that in its own time, in its own place, the conditions of death might possibly be revealed. Now we've got Pluto also dealing with government conspiracy theories. Government conspiracy theories and KGB involvement. And here is why. Because the student that took the Bigfoot picture, that's what I'm calling it, was 38 years old and was not a student at the university. And so people are wondering, why was he spending time with people in their early 20s? Did he not have anything better to do with himself? Did he not have a life? You understand how people think. I understand how people think. So yeah, people are like, that's a little weird. How did he get in there? And the theory came up, well, wait. This was the Cold War. This was the USSR. Is it possible that he was a KGB plant sent to watch these young people for some nefarious reason? Twisting my invisible mustache and with an evil glint in my eye and smiling way too brightly like Pennywise as I contemplate all of those wonderful theories that just make your head just spin, but in a really good way. So that's Pluto. Hanging out in that 12th house, funny, ha ha ha, of everything hidden. And is it possible that those in power would hide things? Wow. Well, that never happens. But here's why. There was a case of witnesses from an indigenous tribe called the Mansai who reported during the investigation of seeing bright lights in the sky during that time period. And add to this that they were very close to a nuclear site. The location was very remote. So it wasn't like there's a big city with an airport nearby. It's remote. This indigenous tribe lives there, but it's clean, pure, primeval territory for kilometers and kilometers, miles and miles. You get the picture. Raw and unspoilt. And not a bad place for nuclear testing. And you wouldn't want to share the information or put it about too much that you were doing said nuclear testing, because it might catch the attention of the West. And considering at this point Cold War, the USSR and the West, which includes UK, France, and the United States, etc., were not on good terms. It was very covert, sneaky, paranoid, and suspicious type of energy. Everybody wondering when everybody else was going to hit that magic red button and blow us all to kingdom come. That was the atmosphere. And so you might understand, looking back, how people might say, and the KGB operates rather like the CIA or Mossad or some of those organizations, or even MI6, which is the UK equivalent, those sort of organizations. So it didn't take long and much with this little detail and a lot of questions, and still to this day not sufficient answers, for people to say, is it possible the government was involved? Is it possible there was nuclear testing and they didn't go around and talk about it because they didn't want anybody to know it was happening? And you can get that Plutonian influence in the 12th house of things hidden and secret. And then you look at Uranus. And at that point, on that time, Uranus was hanging out in Leo. So Leo's the authenticity type of energy, because it is ruled by the groovy sun in this particular chart. And let me tell you where the sun is hanging out. The sun is in the 5th house in Aquarius, which means Uranus in the 11th house, in opposition to the sun, by the way, in Leo. By the way, that is called a mutual reception. You will note that the sun is in Aquarius in the 5th house. The sun calls the shots on the sign of Leo, whilst Uranus in Leo calls the shots on that sun. Uranus shot calls the fixed air sign Aquarius, which means these two planetary bodies are in what is called an opposition, 180 degrees almost, a little bit over, about 3 degrees over thereabouts. And what we have is in the 11th house. The 11th house is authenticity. So things were pretty above board, but it also says the unexpected, because everybody knew what was going on. It was open. It was clear. That type of energy, everybody's trying to be up front. Nobody's trying to hide anything back in the village, meanwhile, back in the village. Okay? And Uranus in Leo, unexpected. The unexpected hits you, and you still want to be transparent. It's just going to be very, very different, because it's kind of hard to know how to behave or feel in a situation that is so beyond comprehension. Whereas that sun is having a difficult time. It likes to be the center of attention, which, by the way, this case, an unexpected case, definitely made that part of the world a very famous place due to one of those, mysterious, frightening, sad, tragic events. And so you get the unexpected in the community in the planetary body form of Uranus, in an opposition, meaning that it's gonna seesaw. There's gonna be that sun in Aquarius learning to be impartial, to think about other people, to know it's not all about them, to wonder at the impact. And the fifth house is about, for the sake of here, it's also speculating, because that's what we're doing. We're speculating. And even the community would be speculating. And so learning to be impartial, but also being enthusiastic, and also being upfront. This is how I understand things. These are the facts. And that Uranian energy brings a bit of the unconventional. It brings shocks, and it brings the unexpected. You send your children up a mountain with the future ahead of them, and they don't come back down the mountain. So you send them up the mountain with a future ahead of them, and the future ends on that mountain. Just let your mind flow with that. Let it just dance around, like a pinball in a glass jar, because that definitely changes the picture. Okay? So that's Uranian, one of its effects. The second is the avalanche theory. And the avalanche theory was put forth in about before the little past the noughties, okay? So about the 10s, 2010 upward thereabouts. And I'd say about 2019, I believe. And what happened was a detective, an investigator, government affiliated, decided to get the answers once and for all, and thereby maybe get closure. So he went up the mountain with a team and walked the area where it would have happened and looked at the conditions. And one of the things he noticed was something he felt that the 1959 rescue team had overlooked, an investigative team had overlooked, was that they noted that the incline, the slope that the hikers were found near was about 15 degrees. That was in the report in 1959. When he and his team measured, they noticed that it was actually 28 degrees. This is significant because at 28 degrees is close enough to 30, and an incline, in order to cause an avalanche, needs to be as steep as 30 degrees. And anything less than that is not going to cause an avalanche. So was it possible that it was close enough for it to be an avalanche? And he just, according to his investigation and the circumstances and what he was able to note of the land, the topography around, he came to the conclusion that they died in an avalanche, and that some of the injuries that they saw, cracked skulls and, fractured rib cages and broken noses and things like that, something that looked as if they'd gotten rattled about, kind of. And he said it was an avalanche, and then prepared himself to do his victory lap. And what happened was there was a backlash. People told him that his theory didn't make any sense, and nobody believed it. And the parents said, "Oh, sit down, you don't know what you're talking about." Basically, everybody told him he didn't know what he's talking about, and they completely dismissed that theory, which led to the next theory. Now, you know that for us, for our conversation here, the 12th house is about hidden traits, things hidden, And one of the things that could be hidden is a brown bear. Now, brown bears were indigenous to that area and still are. And about this time, is it possible, someone asked, if a brown bear couldn't have awakened early from hibernation and gone in search of food and encountered our nine hikers? Is it possible? Now, understand that at that point, brown bears were in hibernation and weren't likely to wake up for another few weeks. But that's that 12th house mystery thing, and also that 12th house hidden thing. That theory was, it's possible, but they thought it was unlikely. So this is through that lens of explaining these outer planetary influences, because outer planets shape events and consciousness. Symbolically speaking, of course. So now we've looked at some of those planetary aspects, and we've ascertained there was a lot of confusion, a lot of mystery, and some of the resources was confusion, and you don't really know what's the truth and what isn't the truth. And it allows you to come up with such theories called "it was everything" theory, which goes like this. They got up the mountain. They didn't get as far as they wanted to get. They decided to set up camp, and they thought they'd stay where they were. The weather was not great. It wasn't getting better, and they thought maybe we didn't want to lose ground. They didn't want to disappoint themselves. They didn't want to disappoint their community, so they decided to set up camp on the slope when it would have been safer to go a few feet lower and have cover, safety from the trees. So they set up camp, and somewhere that would be about 1:30 thereabouts, somewhere about between 1:30 and 4:30, there was lights in the sky, possibly from a missile testing strike, in a remote area that was supposed to be a secret. A sonic blast would be enough to liquefy one's insides from the distance that the hikers were to the nuclear site on the mountain. And so some of them were startled by that sound and cut their way out of the tent. The conditions were very black, and so they didn't know. They couldn't see, but they wouldn't have been able to see anyway because it was also snowing and windy. And so they would have gotten out of that tent. They cut their way out, and they would have gotten very confused. If it were not for the fact that nuclear blast shook up the mountain, sending an avalanche down that 28-degree slope onto our ill-prepared hikers. And that is when they cut the tent open to escape, to assess what's going on. And some of them are probably in states of undress because they were in a tent. And it was hot. And so some of them were not properly dressed and ill-prepared. Not to mention the fact that, as I just said, they were really close to that site, and that site could cause concussions and could liquefy body parts due to the extreme injury and extreme force. So some of them had actually come out of the tent confused, woozy, injured, trying to figure out what's going on. They lose their way. They wander everywhere. It's cold. They're not prepared for the weather. And so they succumb to hypothermia. And this happens at least 3-4 times at different points, with the last set of bodies being in the copse of trees. And they were better prepared for the weather, as it looked like they'd taken the clothes of all their comrades and put them on to give them a better chance of safety, which means the others had probably passed by that time, which would have been between 5:30 and 7:30 a.m. All these times I've mentioned from 1:30 on to 7:30 a.m. And they are surmised to have died closest to February 1st and 2nd due to the conditions of their bodies. The others were also in greater states of decay and had obviously experienced animal predation, whereas these bodies were well preserved and didn't seem to suffer as much. They had some bruising, they had some injuries, yes, but they weren't as severe as some of the others that they saw. And that would be February 1st or 2nd at about 7:30 a.m. And therein lies the story. Now, let's enter our brown bear into the thing. They're lost. It's getting light out. They're wandering around trying to find their tent. They don't find the tent, they find the brown bear, who sees the tent and is looking for food. Instead of finding food, he finds our unprepared hikers trying to find their way to the tent. And it doesn't work out for the hikers. And then the brown bear wanders off. And then there's more predation from other animals, like wolves, for example, and ravens, and, etc. At which point, all is still. Now we've got the brown bear. We've left out the Yeti because it's unlikely that the Yeti was involved. I'm sorry, I'd love to believe this, but no, it's too fantastical even for me. So that's out. But we've managed to include all the other theories, and the concussions and the bodily injuries can be accounted for from the missile strike and the avalanche. Meaning that there was no foul play. Nature was responsible, and it was not the fault of anyone. There was no secret conspiracy theory. Now, it would be lovely if everybody agreed, but they don't, which is why this is such a wonderfully perplexing theory. Now, one last thing before we go. I'm going to talk about, very briefly, the moon. Now, the moon was in its waning third quarter. This is what we call a crisis of consciousness. And that means that there would be a challenge point. And that's the moon phase. We'd feel challenged to act, challenged to resolve things, challenged to take action in the timing of the events. And at these events, they did take action. They built shelters in the snow. They did what most experienced alpinists did. And nature just got the better of them, is how that went. And these theories and these circumstances, since they're not neatly explained, by the way, I believe most of the everything theory as I presented it. And the key takeaway is this. Sometimes the cosmos presents mysteries that teach us about both human nature and cosmic forces. So join our cosmic community on the Daily Stargazer newsletter. You can also find us on Pinterest, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You'll find those links in the show notes. And one closing thought. Ponder, stargazers. The truth, is it written in the stars? Do we just need to learn how to read it? Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars and your mind open to the mysteries of the cosmos. Peace and astro magic, star people.